Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be here this afternoon together with Irlau, talking about a very important topic, which is data integration, patient data integration. And we have so much to talk about, thinking about the future, looking at the past, right, Irlau? And I would like to invite you to join me, since we are here together exchanging ideas on this topic. Please tell us about your perspective. How do you see this topic today? And what are your future prospects in the short term about data integration? Martha, first of all, I also want to thank the organizers of the event for this invitation. It's an honor to be here with you, Martha. Always so quick and smart in this very difficult moment we are going through for health in the planet, the countries, and the communities, which impacts us greatly as humans and as communities, and also dramatically impacts our global health services. So the event of the pandemic has forced companies to speed up their data processes, to understand their patients as rapidly as possible, and also to be anxious to help their patients, to care for their patients, to save lives. And the technological dynamic of the segment was very much sped up. We have telemedicine, which is something that was only discussed and talked about for the last years, many years in fact, but which has become more important and pressing during the pandemic. And it's not only telemedicine, it is telecare, because we not only have doctors' visits and controls and also communication between surgeons during their procedures, so that connectivity brought a totally new dimension. And I always remember that development and innovation are a result of need. And need has become pressing in this moment when we are impacted by this global health crisis. With regards to innovation, just to remind you who we are, and let's talk about innovation in this segment. Intermédica is one of the largest groups in the country. We have 4.3 million beneficiaries of health, a large number also of dental health. We have approximately, and I'm giving you approximate figures. It's not because I don't know, but we depend on finalizing all the purchases. So we have launched a brand for diagnostics, which is called NotreDame. It was launched last year. We have many outlets now for collecting biological material. We can process 5 million tests per month, and we have a relevant presence in the primary care diagnostic area also. Now, talking about innovation, one of the things that we needed urgently was, and this know-how that we acquired along many years, was to compile data on chronic patients, patients with comorbidities, and patients that were grouped into case management groups, where we have a high loyalty level with regards to monitoring the evolution of a patient's pathologies a long time. This gave us a great possibility of reducing the negative evolution of the diseases so that we could provide not only well-being and higher quality of life for patients, but also cost efficiency for their treatment. We also need to transfer this technology for all the other groups or the other patients. We have 200,000 people involved in this system initially, and now with the volume of patients that we have started a process to transfer technology to all our patients. One important step in the process was to capture their information through a diagnostic process through our clinical and image testing clinics with fast sampling for adverse events, such as, for instance, cardiac events that can be detected rapidly through clinical analyses and with the help of an assistant physician. So we have a database that is already in our company for almost 50 years. Our company is accustomed to holding patient data for this very long period that we have existed. And with that, we can have a more active stance facing the development of our patients' diseases. And this was accelerated during the pandemic because of the need to understand more rapidly the occupation rate of our units. So as I said, we were in great need of innovating. We have added more than 1,000 beds to our institutions during the second wave of the pandemic, but we also started to monitor our patients' therapeutic outcome so that we could understand the best and most efficient measures for this period. This data is not lost, obviously. It is engineered and worked on so that we can have a more predictive view of therapeutic outcomes. And it also can be used so that we can see our own capacity now compared to what we will need projected into the future in a more efficient manner. We are still in a very delicate and sensitive moment in the pandemic. And as I have said, we felt the pressing need to start and speed up. But on the other hand, we also need to allocate resources in a very short term. It's no use thinking that we can set up a whole system to be shiny and new and efficient in our work in only 5 years if we're not ready to help the country survive these 5 years. That is, we need to be alive so that we can be successful. Therefore, it is still a moment of reflection and of conversation with society. Everybody is still very anxious with regards to patients that are victims of COVID-19 and its different variants. And in this period, we have seen many opportunities to develop technologies or to implement existing technologies. But unfortunately, it is a very difficult time, which prevents us from speeding up certain things, such as, for example, the anamnesis, which could be done typically using a cell phone, a mobile phone, or other devices, instead of focusing on the future development that will tell us whether, as a nation, not as a company, whether we will have a oxygen for a COVID patient. So the pandemic brings opportunities for accelerating, but it also brings difficulties in allocating investments, especially in technology. This is something that needs to be understood. When the results of these developments will arrive, facing the immediate needs of our society. What I usually say about our company is that we are not abandoning in any way the understanding of how important it is to integrate data and to develop new technologies. One of our companies actually is strictly focused on observing and monitoring all innovations that come up, as well as new technologies that are announced globally. And I mean globally. Recently, we went to Lithuania to seek medications. But we understand that some of these initiatives are in different rates of maturing, and many times they impact the whole world. I'm talking about the pandemic. So I would like to open for questions, maybe. Of course, while I was listening to your comments, I also made some notes to develop on them. And meanwhile, we are waiting for our participants to send in their questions. Please write them on the chat. So we do have a great need to have a more integrated and organized system, because we don't circulate in one system alone. And this has become more clearer during the pandemic. I understand the out-of-pocket with my physician, and then I go to a lab for a test, and then I go to a vaccination unit. So I am across all the health systems. But at the same time, I am a unique individual. How will my data be organized and integrated in a system, I mean? So if we extrapolate that to technology, everybody today owns a smartphone or a smartwatch, or thousands of possibilities for biosensors that are beginning to come to Brazil, sensors in the household. How can we integrate all that so it makes some sense? Or else you'll have lots of data on about me spread throughout the whole place, but they can't be used effectively if they're not properly integrated. And some important reflections. One of them is the LGPD, the Data Privacy Protection Law in Brazil. People are worried about this, but I think that it's positive. It will organize data, and if you have data that is useful, it has permission, as long as you can follow the rules that are there to use it. So this is the first thing that I would like to hear your opinion about. The second one is how we make up the patient data. This was always very important to me, because I am a patient and the data belongs to me. So if it's mine, it belongs to my private physician. It belongs to the public health system, but it has to be mine, owned by me. And recently we brought a company from Holland, and we were the 25th country to bring this methodology to Brazil. We're already present in 24 countries. So we were discussing about bringing the method to Brazil or not, and all the training it involved. And when we see the level of non-integration of data in our country, people find it really hard to understand what we do here. So it's the other way around. They find it so difficult to understand this lack of organization exactly. So if we think about the biosensors and all the information you were talking about, all this has to be integrated somehow in the other forms of care I have, and in turn, it leads to more needs. So I agree with you that the pandemic was an accelerator, and it will continue as such. I usually say that telemedicine did not come because of the pandemic. Actually, it accelerated by 5 years what we were doing. But this acceleration will also be used for other things. So to me, telemedicine is a commodity. It is a way of assessing or accessing your patient, physically or virtually. Now, what comes after telemedicine? That's what the world is discussing and wondering. And after that, in my view, I have no doubt that we will see prediction. So with all this data on genetics, biosensors, and all these features that are to arrive, we will be able to work with prediction. So my first message was on the data protection law, and now I will leave my second message, which is, what is this idea of here in Brazil, we have a good prospect of working with prediction if we have not made our homework. That is, data integration, larger databases, because each one continues to be separated from the other. Well, I believe that these are very relevant points that you rose. First of all, data, patient data, belongs to patient, and that is how it must always be. And people must have direct and free access to their data at any point in time. The data integration that you mentioned, and you also mentioned some European countries, does find some difficulties in Brazil. If you compare Brazil to Holland or Denmark, of course, it's 10, 20 times larger, and our availability of technologies in such a large and continental countries is entirely different from what you see in the European countries. We might even be closer to the US than to Europe in this sense because of the diversity we have and availability of access to telecommunication technologies, etc. One example, in the São Paulo hospitals, for example, we have more PET scan equipment than the European countries together. So this is so complex to be able to absorb, manage, create mechanisms for data transfer and use, data of patient data, of course, and it's an enormous complexity, whereas others have it. So in Brazil, we have this internal complexity. Now, on the other hand, unfortunately, what happens today is that we have Google. You have a test exam, immediately you go to the web and you look for outcomes and therapeutic outcomes of this diagnostic. So these are points that will need to be assessed later on when we talk about access to patient data. And we have policies in Brazil which define that when you receive an exam, you have to be followed by a physician, but access needs to be generalized, of course. As for my concern with regard to the possibility of transferring this data between and among different health players. There are limitations, ethical limitations, obviously, that must exist at any moment. So that is where the devil lies. Unfortunately, we imagine that it would be very good, but unfortunately, all the details and bureaucracy involved in these processes may make it counterproductive for health. And this is a moment for a broad discussion with society about privacy versus well-being, which many times can be damaged because of the bureaucracy. So with regards to the LGPD, data protection law, and data access, these are my ideas. Now, with regards to health itself, we still in Brazil have a situation not only about innovation, but also the establishment of sustainability to the sector in the long term.
When we talk about complementary health, so today it represents 97% of the compensation of private hospitals in the country. Without health insurance companies, you don't have the large hospitals that come up to your mind, Einstein, Sírio, Samaritano, Oswaldo Cruz, etc. So those are partners in the quality health development in the country. They are the financiers, but they are not indeed. The financiers are the users, right? The beneficiaries of health insurance companies, 47 million beneficiaries, whereas there should be 90 million. Because of lack of access, we don't have it today. Unfortunately, due to some reason in the past, the complementary healthcare in Brazil, it was actually affected by a syndrome, because it's not a cyclic disease, it's a rare, long-term disease. It's called GENI. I don't know if the younger users would understand this concept of the Chico Buarque de Holanda song. Okay, let's throw stones at GENI. Everything you can, because GENI is basically demon, whereas it should be interpreted as the partner of public health in Brazil. Let me give you an example now. During the pandemic, in which healthcare insurance companies or plans, they seem to be very busy. Historically, they cannot be commended. But during this period, we have 18% increase in tax in healthcare inputs through a bill that was passed in Assembly, commanded by Governor João Dória, 18% exporting this cost to other countries and other actually municipalities and states, because São Paulo accounts for 70% of the production in the country. We had 66 new procedures in the list of the National Healthcare Agency, ANS, and COVID test costs 200 reais. And so we have, nobody takes a single test. Let me ask you, Martha, how many tests have you taken? Because I may say that I myself have taken more than one. And so we have a situation that is very adverse. We have the search for reduction or elimination of price adjustment. We have 0.7 cents, now it's 0.70%, 1,000% increase of commission that we had for education that account for adjustment of 800% on average. And we have a huge increase in respirators, ventilators that have price increases 500, 600%, and all of this we look at the health insurance as a great villain in this process of solution. And it's much on the contrary. We are a solution. And on the other hand, there is this reasoning of society which is not like that. Do you want to integrate to a national health system and all companies in the industry, labs, health system companies, so that we have access to information, prediction, and this information to us is absolutely fundamental, key, so that everybody has transparency regarding what happens. There is no transparency in that. An event, for example, performed by a doctor, pointed out as member of the prosthesis mafia. 5 years later, he's never been punished. The patients don't know that they're going to a doctor that is a target of federal police because of prosthesis mafia. And there is no such information in the West. There is in the US. Once you get a penny to go to a conference, it has to be stated on your record. So we have to improve information on hospitals that, for example, appendicitis surgery, they charge 50 times more than a second hospital. Nobody knows about that. This remains as something obscure. We must have transparency in the sense so that everybody can make their decisions in terms of healthcare cost benefit, so that the companies can have that too. Even technologies for information being circulated. If we had greater transparency, more data integration, we would be able to have better decisions on the part of the decision-making people or persons that ultimately are beneficiaries. Great. I'm going to take some points of what you've mentioned. Quite important. Sorry, I'm changing. I'm moving here because of the lighting. I think there is this debate of our being a huge country with income inequality, with access inequality, and all of that. But for us to have different healthcare systems, for us to actually have a decision that information is important, we must, well, at some point, Irlau, I believe that the information needed to be vertical, right? You see, so Ministry of Health has made a decision that data is important, and this, like the other countries, and this information would somehow echo throughout the country. So there are some cases around, as it's been the system of where the vaccines come from. So the connected suits was really nice. We could see information on vaccines, on COVID data, private laboratories. So it's very good. But today I believe that we won't have this in a uniform way. Yes, we'll do it, but not possible. Some local initiatives come up, and they somehow will be organized in a more macro format. But anyhow, I believe in the management decision that data is important, that we're finally getting there. Because we see the importance not only of data, for this to effectively reverting into a healthcare organization, this is actually hitting the pocket. The fact that I do not have information leads me to spend much more than I would if I had the information. And something very important, something that I think that is most important of all, is that information requires education. When we were at ANAPI, we surveyed some patients and we realized that simply by delivering some information to patients was not enough. We needed to deliver information along with education so that they could understand the information. I think that in the pandemic, this has been made very clear. There's a study made by Google, and I love it. So I love clippings. If you take my phone, I have photos of clippings, daily clippings of newspapers and magazines with the highlights of what has been happening And sometimes I teach, taking clippings from the beginning of the pandemic until now, so people understand what has happened. It's been very intense and very fast. Historically, we only understand by looking back. I took back. I took a first clipping of where people were getting information on the pandemic regarding COVID. It was from Anselmo Góes. It was a study in the second week of the pandemic, and he took what Google was doing. People were getting information within a website of a religious institute that said that all you have to do is pray so that you don't get infected. This was the most accessed website during the first 2 weeks of the pandemic. Many months later, Google did or carried out this survey again, and we see total gearing or direction towards the